To the people of the state of New York, the second charge against the House of Representatives is that it will be too small to possess a due knowledge of the interest of its constituents, as this objection evidently proceeds from the comparison the proposed number of representatives with the great extent of the United States, the number of their inhabitants, and the diversity of their interests, without taking into view at the same time the circumstances which will distinguish the Congress from other legislative bodies. The best answer that can be given to it will be a brief explanation of these peculiarities. It's a sound and important principle that the representative ought to be acquainted with the interests and circumstances of his or her constituents. But this principle can extend no farther than to those circumstances and interests to which the authority and care of the representative relate in ignorance of a variety of minute and particular objects, which do not lie within the compass of legislation, is consistent with every attribute necessary to a due performance of the legislative trust in determining the extent of information required in the exercise of a particular authority. Recourse then must be had to the objects within the purview of that authority. What are to be the objects of federal legislation? Those which are the most important and which seem most to require local knowledge are commerce, taxation, and the militia. A proper regulation of commerce requires much information, as has been elsewhere remarked, but as far as this information relates to the laws and local situation of each individual state, very few representatives would be very sufficient vehicles of it to the federal councils. Taxation will consist in a great measure of duties which will be involved in the regulation of commerce. So far, the preceding remark is applicable to this object as far as it may consist of internal collections. A more diffusive knowledge of the circumstances of the state may be necessary, but will not this also be possessed in sufficient degree by the very few intelligent men diffusively elected within the state? Divide the largest state into 10 or 12 districts, and it will be found that there will be no peculiar local interest in either, which will not be within the knowledge of the representative of the district. Besides this source of information, the laws of the state framed by representatives from every part of it will be almost of themselves a sufficient guide. In every state there have been made and must continue to be made regulations on this subject, which will in many cases leave little more to be done by the federal legislature than to review the different laws and reduce them into one general act. A skillful individual in his closet with all the local codes before him might compile a law on some subjects of taxation for the whole Union without any aid from oral information, and it may be expected that whenever internal taxes may be necessary, and particularly in cases requiring uniformity throughout the states, the more simple objects will be preferred. To be fully sensible of the facility which will be given to this branch of federal legislation by the assistance of the state codes, we need only suppose for a moment that this or any other state were divided into a number of parts, each having and exercising within itself a power of local legislation. The power of local legislation. This is Publius, Federalist, 56, James Madison, New York Independent Journal, James Madison, 56, Federalist, February 16th, 1788, February 16th, 1788.